Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. I'm going to sit here for a minute in the shop. I'm working on stuff. In fact, one of the things I'm working on is firearms projects. So, I have a gun channel. I have kept these channels mostly separate, but I'm just going to, I think I'm going to try to post to both, but I'm going to start combining a little bit more of the content because I think that while for me firearms are a fun thing, I like to tinker, and they're utilitarian because I live in the country and I actually use them for like regular tool purposes, you know, butchering animals, the occasional rattlesnake, which makes a good Brunswick stew, stuff like that. Predators in the pasture, you know. I also enjoy shooting. It's a cultural issue, but it is identified for me as an American as a skill that is particular to Americans. Not exclusive to Americans, but particular to Americans. It's part of our heritage of individual liberty. The reason that I have individual liberty to a large extent is because of this. You know, you can go back to various types of accounts of the period prior to the Revolutionary War and the Revolutionary War, and you can get a whole lot of different things. You know, at one point the British allowed the citizens of a city to leave if they would turn in their guns before the siege, you know, and you had, you know, a couple thousand people do it, and they got 1,000 muskets and 1,500 rifles and 3 blunderbusses, and you know, it's kind of interesting to see what people were armed with. You know, most cannon at one point in our history, early in our history, were privately owned. You know, this is kind of a broad thing. The accuracy emphasis, the rifleman, the pistolero, is also a peculiar part of the American myth, the mythos, and our culture. So, you know, I'm an American, and being able to shoot well is a part of my social conditioning, and it's a part that I maintain and value because it's critical to liberty, to freedom, on an individual level and on a societal level. And so there's that, you know. And so the gun channel is very much not about politics, it's more about tinkering, although I get into it a little bit. You can't really avoid getting into, call it philosophical discussions of something that has a critical importance like this, okay? You know, you don't get to just say, oh, I can't, you know, I won't talk about God, you know, even though I'm religious, because I'm talking about having dinner, or what I'm eating for dinner, or how I butcher animals, and that's not an appropriate place for whatever. You can't separate everything very easily. So there's that. But it's mostly a tinkering type of channel. However, I think there's going to be more crossover because of the freedom and individual artistry aspects of it. You know, as insofar as I use this channel to discuss any kind of magic, creative magic is always going to be a part of things, and for me that does involve making things out of metal, and that includes firearms. Okay, all of that being said, what else are we going to talk about today? Well, let's go ahead and talk about freedom. I was just involved in a conversation, again, about abortion, again, and the people involved really refused to engage with the issue that I have. And the issue that I have is that the pro-abortion crowd, and I use that term very specifically. When I say pro-abortion, I'm not referring to, Mike quotes some statistic that I have not verified. He says something like 70% of Americans think that abortion should be safe and legal with some restrictions, which is a fairly moderate position to have. And I'm not even going to say that I disagree with that, although I have a specific question that you have to ask and answer before you can really make a lot of decisions. And this is where I get into trouble with a lot of people, because this conversation doesn't happen. And the conversation is about when humanity starts. When are we talking about a person? When are we denying a humanity? When are we denying human rights? When are we denying personhood? And that is pretty critical. Throughout our history, we've had various times where various groups of people were not considered human. Whether they were Chinese immigrants working the railroads in the West, or Irish slaves in the 17th and 18th centuries, or African slaves in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, there were Indians, Native American Indians, actually both, Indian continent Indians for the British in some sense. There were people who were not defined as human, and so if you killed them, you never got a murder charge. That's kind of like one of the caveats there. Legally not considered human. And that is a bad thing for your society, to take classes of people and say, you're not human. That's bad. It's a very dangerous thing for your society. So my question, my fairly continuous question is, what are we defining as human? Where do we define that? Where do we draw the line? You know, and the current conversation started about Pete Buttigieg trying to defend third trimester abortion as all edge cases. It needs to be legal and unregulated because it only happens in edge cases. And that logic is suspect, to say the least. You know, we're not... And this conversation, you know, my other friend, starts with a P, he won't acknowledge that all of his examples are edge cases. He talks about, you have to make third trimester legal because of rape. You have to make it legal because of health of the mother. Now, health of the mother, an actual medical necessity, is a different situation. We have a lot of law and practice and ethics surrounding that, and that's not the topic. You know, it's always the, well, you're going to deny women access to life-saving treatment. And I'm like, well, you know, that's not the situation we're in. And then the argument is that you'll prosecute them even though they needed it because they didn't have a doctor. I'm like, look, if you're dealing with an emergency, save the life of the mother, third trimester abortion, you better fucking have a fucking doctor around, okay? This is a life-threatening induced birth. It is. That's what it is. You maybe should have someone around. That's... Yeah, so these arguments don't make sense, but the arguments always leave out and refuse. Now, I spent a couple hours on this, you know, people putting words in my mouth. Mike was putting words in my mouth. You know, I say, okay, we're not talking about the pro-choice 70%, we're talking about the pro-abortion. So I say the phrase pro-abortion because I'm trying to differentiate from his supposed 70% of Americans who want safe, legal, limited abortion. You know, the pro-abortion cloud, the shoutyourabortion.com, the professors who wear the I had my first abortion at 20 and my second abortion at 21, you know, people who wear these shirts. This is pro-abortion crowd. They advocate for funding, education, making sure that everyone knows it's always an option all the time. They are pro-abortion. They want you to have an abortion. They want you to not have children. Whether they are the classic eugenics progressive model where they don't want you to have children because you're poor or black, or they don't want you to have children because of the patriarchy or whatever, they are pro-abortion. They are not pro-choice. And I make that differentiation, that distinction, and of course the conversation never gets back to my question, which is, when do we discuss humanity? I get told, with no references, by two people that it's a demonization to say that Planned Parenthood, Shout Your Abortion, whatever, the activist groups that are promoting abortion or abortion rights, that it's a demonization to say that they don't have this conversation, but I can't find it. I can't have that conversation. I've gone to meetings. I've written email. I've talked to congressmen. I've had this argument on IRC, on Discord, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram of all places, on Plusbora, on Mastodon. I've had this discussion, I've had this argument on LiveJournal all the way back when, and various news groups. I've had this attempt at a discussion for decades, and at no point, not once, on a website or in a discussion, have I seen an actual questioning, an advocacy, a when do you become human debate from the pro-abortion side. Excuse me, I've got it. Morning, gents. We have a CAG in town. So, and this is the main thrust of my response to the abortion discussion that's going on, or Pete Buttigieg's stunning defense of late-term abortions on Fox News, which is not how this played out. Regardless, all of this discussion, no one will respond. When are you human? No one will respond to my claim that this is a critical thing to not get wrong for your society. You cannot have a healthy society that engages in slavery and dehumanization. When you make classes of people not human, it's very bad. It's a very evil spiritual ill for your society. When you turn people into slaves, okay, and right now I am absolutely talking about the way our prison system is run. When you turn people into slaves, use them for amusement, torture them for amusement, abuse them for profit, you are in a very dangerous place, and it is a serious spiritual ill for your society. You can say psychological ill if you want. Okay, I'm thinking a little bit broader than just a basic psychology of celebrating rape. Okay, and you'll notice this is very much not limited to conservatives. It's much more a progressive thing, in my experience, online, than it is a conservative thing. People who celebrate sending people to a prison to be tortured and raped tend to actually be a little more socially liberal, but not terribly. It's the neo-lib thing, you know, than conservatives. You get really hardcore Christian conservatives, they actually go do ministries at prisons, okay? They're in a different place, man. So, that's that. Once again, you know, the endless abortion debate, and no one will engage in the primary issues that I have. When can you safely determine inhumanity, and what is the damage to your society, to your soul, to your psychology, to your morals, to your ethics, when you get that wrong? Think about it. And hey, stay sideways.